Focus today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. And of course, there's a lot going on in the Middle East, and we want to stay on top of that. And I am so honored to have back with us today Jonathan Tobin. He is the editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate. He's also the host of the Top Story with Jonathan Tobin there on the JNS website. He's a senior contributor to The Federalist and a columnist for the New York Post, Newsweek, and other outlets. And you can contact or track a lot of his articles at jns.org, which is the Jewish News Syndicate, jns.org. Jonathan, good to see you again. How are you, friend? Oh, we don't have any audio on you. Do we have audio on them there, guys? Talk to me again.
Great to be with you.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Thank you for your time. Good to see you, sir. I'm having a hard time to ask this question, but is there daylight between President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
Unfortunately, there is. That's a phrase that we learned during the Obama administration, when President Obama really set it as his goal to create more daylight between the United States and Israel. That wasn't the case in the first Trump administration, and I don't believe that's necessarily what President Trump wants as a goal the way Obama did. But the fact is there is daylight, and there's daylight between the United States and Israel on Iran principally, and perhaps also about the conflict with Hamas. And that is of great concern to friends of Israel, and I think for those who care about the security of the United States in general as well.
Okay, so where do we go with this? I would say, let's start with Iran first. President Trump wants to negotiate. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is being motivated by what is clearly a line in the sand of them developing nuclear weapons. Where do we go here?
Well, let me start out by saying that we shouldn't exaggerate the differences between the two countries. The Obama example is pertinent here. Obama, and to some extent Biden as well, their goal was not just, a bad deal. They wanted a rapprochement with Iran. They wanted, as Obama said, Iran to get right with the world. They wanted to transfer America's interests in the region from one of closeness with allies like Israel and to some extent Saudi Arabia as well, to that of Iran, an Islamist country that is at war with the West and the United States, because it considers Israel the little Satan, America the great Satan. But what President Trump is intent on doing is getting a negotiated deal with Iran over its nuclear program. Now, in theory, I think that's reasonable. You should always try diplomacy before force is resorted to. But the problem is, A, we've tried as a nation diplomacy with Iran many times. They are never really interested in an agreement that will satisfy both sides. They're only interested in getting a nuclear weapon and in getting over on the West and taking advantage of us. They've shown that time and again, as with Obama's terrible, weak nuclear deal that actually guaranteed that they would get a bomb, not preventing it. So Trump has sat his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, who has, I think he's compromised by his dealings with Qatar. He does not seem to be very tough or a very astute negotiator. And if reports are to be believed, we're heading for another bad nuclear deal. The Israelis are they are very upset about that because Iran is a deadly threat to Israel's existence. They've attacked Israel many times. They've used their terrorist forces to attack it. They are behind the October 7th massacre, so much else, a seven-front war. And Iran is really vulnerable right now, since Israel stripped them of their air defenses last year. Now is the time, if anybody's going to attack them, now's the time to do it before the Russians replace those air defense systems. So that's why Israel is very concerned, because if that's put off too long, it will be that much harder and that much less effective if force is needed. Trump has said, don't attack them while I'm negotiating with them. Now, Trump always talks up negotiations. He says he's very optimistic. It could be a great deal. That's the way he always talks about deals while they're in the offing. What we have to hope is that he is someone who knows the difference between a good deal and a bad deal, unlike Obama. He also is not out to appease them. He really does want to forestall the possibility of an Iranian nuclear weapon. We have to hope that unless the Iranians do the completely unexpected and agree to measures that Trump talks about, where they would actually be verification, where it would be impossible for them to get a bomb, what we're heading to is a weak deal that will allow them to basically get away with murder, retain their nuclear program, when what we need is for them to give up their nuclear program. They don't need it. They're awash in oil. They don't need nuclear power. What the West and Israel and the United States needs is a denuclearized Iran. And frankly, I'm not sure that the current negotiations that the United States is having with them is heading towards that.
Wow, a lot there. So do you think it's possible that the Trump administration is this naive to think that he could make a deal that would stick and denuclearize Iran? I
hope not. There are people within this administration, some, and many of them are good people, who are, I think, understandably, and listen, all Americans are against more wars. We don't want to have to get involved in more adventures in the Middle East. But there are people in this administration that seem to be a bit soft on Iran, which is, as I said, a deadly threat to the West as well as to Israel. I think we have to hope that President Trump's good sense will prevail, unless the miraculous happens and the Iranians really do want to rejoin the world. I don't believe that's possible. I know Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't believe that's possible. We'll see whether President Trump, he's a tough cookie. He's somebody, he's not a naive person. He understands the world, but he does want to be a peacemaker. He hates wars. He doesn't want to be involved in military adventures if he can possibly avoid it. He's going to be given the chance to see if he can do that with Iran. I just don't think there's any really rational reason to think that that's a likely outcome. And I'm hoping and praying that President Trump will not fall prey to the Iranians the way Obama did, the way Biden did, and that he will eventually come to the conclusion that there's no dealing with them, that it's impossible.
So, Jonathan, do you think it's possible that the current administration is using the potential of the art of the deal to show the world that he tried diplomatically? Well, all along he has said they cannot have a nuclear weapon. So part of this deal making is to win, I guess, world acceptance that he tried everything and it failed, therefore.
I would hope that that would be the case. And I think you can make a fairly good argument. But, there's only one person. This is not like the Biden administration where it was being run by a committee of, God knows who. In this administration, there are a lot of people that talk, but only one person decides, and that's President Donald J. Trump. I think he's earned the trust of the pro-Israel community and the American people when it comes to these things. But we also have to have our eyes open. He's not infallible. Yeah. And we have to hope that what he's doing will lead to what you just said, that, but that's, while he's involved in diplomatic negotiations, he's all in on them. And we have to hope that the momentum of the diplomatic process, which, under Obama and Biden, it was diplomacy for its own sake. That's not what Trump believes in. But I'm not so sure about Steve Witkoff. I'm not so sure. I certainly don't believe that the Iranians want a good outcome here. So we just have to hope and pray that President Trump uses his good sense and that when the Iranians prove to him who they are, as inevitably they will, he will come to the right conclusion.
I can't help but think that this administration would understand and trust the Israel intelligence to be far more accurate than anybody else on the face of the earth of what's going on in Iran and understand the line in the sand is right smack in front of their nose.
Yeah, the Israelis are very much on top of what's going on in Iran. They proved it time and again with their, sort of amazing covert operations there, which have sort of handicapped the Iranian effort, but not stopped it entirely. I think President Trump knows that. But if in the scenario that you charted, where he's just trying to convince the world, he's putting on a very good show of it, that he's not listening to the Israelis. There's a lot that's happened in the last few weeks where, his first trip to the Middle East, he pointedly did not go to Israel. Vice President Vance didn't subsequently go to Israel when he was nearby. He has publicly warned the Israelis, not to take action against Iran. His quote unquote deal with the Houthis, the terrorists in Yemen that have been attacking international shipping, as well as firing missiles at Israel. That wasn't a very good show, and it's worrying a lot of people in Israel, and I think they have reason to be worried.
Sure.
There's a great reservoir of good feeling for President Trump, and he's earned that. But we're going to see. I mean, I have no crystal ball where I can predict, the future. I can only tell you what I've seen, what I've heard, what the sources say. And, the sources, and indeed, President Trump talks as if this deal is imminent with Iran. And the Israelis all believe, with their good intelligence, that it's going to be a terrible deal for the United States as well as Israel. Again, we have to hope that's not what Donald Trump actually wants to do, and that he is going to expose the Iranians for the liars and the cheats that they are, and then draw the right conclusion. But, that's for the future to decide.
How are you swallowing the cozying up to Qatar?
Well, I take a very dim view of America's, as you say, cozying up to Qatar. It is, as the best that you could term them is the word frenemy. They're very close with Iran. They're very close with Hamas. They're the primary funder of Hamas. They host the Muslim Brotherhood and its leader in their own country. They fund Islamic fundamentalism all across the world, including here in the United States. They're bad actors. It's a rogue nation. But they're also, at times, they're American allies. There's an American base there. They play both ends against the middle all the time. The gift of a plane to President Trump, I think it's exaggerated. It's not a plane that can be used. President Trump will never fly in that plane because it just needs to be totally refurbished. It's obsolete. They just got rid of it. But the symbolism there of him and with Steve Witkoff, who was frankly bailed out in his real estate business by the Qataris to the tune of over $500 million, it smells bad. It looks bad, and frankly, I don't like the idea. And I think it's not just people in Israel. A lot of sensible people in the United States are worried about the way they are trying to buy influence in this administration, the way they've bought up the influence on American college campuses, and around the world. That's bad. We shouldn't trust them. They're in bed with Hamas in Iran. They don't wish the United States well. They are part of the coalition of Islamists who are against us, even though at times they tell us that they're with us. Now, of course, let's not, they're not this, impossible to defeat enemy. The reason why they are cozying up to the United States and to President Trump is because they're much weaker than they were. Their allies are weaker. And that's because of what Israel did in Lebanon and helped topple the regime in Syria that was allied to Qatar and Iran. They're doing this out of desperation, not strength. So we shouldn't listen that closely to them. They need the United States far more than the United States needs them.
Wow. All right, let me take a quick break. Check out Jonathan's website, jns.org, which is the Jewish News Syndicate. There's a picture of the landing page. That is the place to go to get informed. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and such an honor to have back with us today Jonathan Tobin. He's the editor-in-chief there at the Jewish News Syndicate. He's the host of The Top Story with Jonathan Tobin there at JNS, senior contributor to The Federalist and columns with the New York Post and Newsweek and other outlets. His website, there's a picture of the landing page, jns.org. So much to ask, John, so little time. Jonathan, excuse me. What's your take of the president's action with Syria?
Well, he is assuming that the new regime in Syria, which is led by a former member of Al Qaeda and ISIS, has reformed. That they've truly turned their coat. He's been encouraged to do so by not merely by the Saudis and others who see this new regime rightly as a victory for the forces that are opposing Iran, and there's no reason to believe. President Trump says he's dropped sanctions. He's giving them every incentive to sort of join the West, like the Saudis have. He's invited them to join the Abraham Accords and make peace with Israel. Now, I honestly, I think if you think that this regime of jihadists is going to make peace with Israel, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. I don't believe there's a single person in Israel who believes that. Syria is a very belligerent country, and also it's kind of a made-up country. It's a little like Iraq. As we learn to our sorrow as Americans in our involvement there. It's made up of a bunch of regions that were cobbled together by the French a century ago, with the Druze, the Alawites, the various nationalities there. They're all at war with each other. This is an unstable regime. And until the Assads took over in 1970, it was kind of a banana republic without bananas, with a coup practically every other year. I don't know what the Las Vegas odds are on this regime in Damascus being in power a year from now.
Yeah.
I think I think it's a pretty long shot.
Yeah.
Sort of like I think the odds are of it being in power, 5 years from now, are about the same as the odds of my favorite team, the New York Jets, of winning the Super Bowl next year.
Wow.
Which are not great. So, I don't think that's very likely. Here, President Trump is giving them a chance to join the good guys. Their ability to do so, even if they wanted to, is limited, and I'm not sure they really want to. And I think, the Israelis have their guards up with respect to this regime in Syria. Yeah. They're preparing for the worst, not the best.
Okay, so the bottom line here with this whole thing going on is back to Iran, and what's so interesting to me is that we've tried radiation with the cancer, we've tried chemo with this cancer. Now it looks like we're trying ice cream.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I'm sure the Ayatollahs were thrilled when Trump initiated negotiations with them and having direct talks. I have to say, Biden, for all of his, and his people chasing after the Iranians for those 4 years from 21 to 25, they never talked directly with the Iranians. They used intermediaries because they didn't want to get too compromised by them. So the fact that we are engaged in direct talks with the Iranians, and then, the point of contact is Steve Witkoff, who, again, not an experienced diplomat. The fact that he isn't experienced isn't a disqualifier, because most of our experienced diplomats got us the first Iran nuclear deal. But he does not seem to have a very firm grounding on who these people are, who the Qataris are. The truth is, the only way that we can be sure that Iran won't have a nuclear program is for them to get rid of their nuclear program. And frankly, what we are offering to do for them is to strengthen this regime. The main effect of the Iran nuclear deal wasn't just that it eventually guaranteed that they would get a bomb. That's what Obama was giving them. The relaxation of sanctions and the delivery of billions in frozen funds was an enormous shot in the arm to a regime that is hated by most of the Iranian
Right,
people,
right, right.
and enabled them to fund their terrorist allies, all their terrorist auxiliaries all across the Middle East, who have been waging this seven front war against Israel. I would hate to think the United States was going to go down that road again, because we would just get the same results: more
Right.
war, more bloodshed,
Right.
more terrorism.
Okay, so the bottom line is here really, Iran has never been more, if I can use the term, vulnerable than it is right now. And Israel knows that. Israel also knows where the line of the sand is. Israel's also been replenished with weaponry from the United States. Israel cannot allow this to continue with any form of nuclear armament in Iran. And to your other point, the citizenry of Iran would love a regime change. Is it possible? Iran just,
Well,
is it possible that Israel says, thank you, President Trump, for being with us, but you're wrong. We got to take care of ourselves.
Well, I think that's what Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to tell President Trump. But let's be honest here. The notion that Israel would, basically would attack Iran while Trump is negotiating with them, or even after, if he's concluded a deal with them, it sort of would. There have been times when Israel has said no to the United States. It is a sovereign state. It is its interests are its interests. The United States interests are very closely aligned with Israel, but they're not identical. But I don't think Netanyahu would risk a breach with Trump by directly thwarting him and attacking Iran, with the United States telling him, no, don't do it. I don't think that's going to happen, because Israel, for all of its strength and its ability, frankly, it needs the United States. It needs the American people to support it, which I have no doubt that the overwhelming majority of Americans do support Israel. That's one of the reasons, why they voted for Donald Trump, because they knew he was a good friend of Israel. But Israel cannot stand alone in the world.
Right,
it is
right.
largely isolated. Europe is turned against it.
Right.
Canada, it needs the United States to help supply it with arms. That it needs to continue the war against Hamas and against Iran. But it really can't, tell Donald Trump to go jump in a lake, because the consequences of that would be unknowable.
Okay, I get it. I don't know if we understand that pressure, but that's obviously the driving factor. Before I run out of time, I do want to go over to Hamas. In the meantime, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made it very clear that Hamas cannot exist, and they have to finish the job. Is President Trump slowing that down too?
I'm not saying he hasn't. Unlike President Biden, he hasn't tried to slow down Israel's military efforts. But these are almost two separate issues. Prime Minister Netanyahu is faced with an impossible choice. Israel's two war aims in the war against Hamas are get the hostages back and eradicate Hamas. Those two goals are, sadly, mutually exclusive.
Right.
Hamas will never release all the hostages unless its future is guaranteed and that it remains in power in Gaza. And that is something that is incompatible with Israel's security. It's a guarantee of more October 7th. What Trump wants is peace. Trump fancies himself a peacemaker, a deal maker. He wants to expand the Abraham Accords. That's all good. I applaud him for that. He also hates forever wars, the idea of a war that just goes on and on and on. The trouble is, Israel's stuck with a forever war because the Palestinians will not make peace. And so that's why it's got to go on. The fight to destroy Hamas and all its supporters is not something that's going to be over in a couple of weeks. And that is a source of tension, not the same direct disagreement as with Iran. It's a source of tension with Trump because he wants the war to be over with. But Israel can't be over with the war as long as Hamas is alive. Trump understands that. He said he opposes Hamas's existence. He wants to turn Gaza into a resort. Well, you're not getting that unless Israel achieves complete victory. And that takes time and effort and patience. And President Trump has many good qualities, but I'm afraid patience isn't always one of them.
Okay, so how would you gauge the citizenry of Israel relative to hostages versus Hamas elimination? Does the average citizen understand this point that it's possible we may never see these people alive again?
I think a lot of people do. It's difficult for me to convey to an American audience sort of the culture of Israel, which is summed up in this issue. You have to, Israel is a small country. It's the size of New Jersey. Its population is like the population of New York State, more or less. It's a small country. Most of the people serve in the military, men, women too. And there's sort of a pact between the country and its citizens. Is if somebody gets captured, the country goes and gets them. The country, nobody's left behind. It's kind of like the Marines. People understand that. And we have a tradition, religious tradition in the Jewish, in the Jewish faith of, it's called in Hebrew, Pidyon Shvuyim, the obligation to ransom hostages. Now, unfortunately, in 2,000 years of persecution, we've got a lot of experience with the hostage taking and people being kidnapped. But the point is, it's an obligation to ransom them, but it's also an obligation not to pay too much so as to encourage the kidnappers and the thugs to do more violence. This is an impossible position for Netanyahu to be in, because if he doesn't get all the people back, a lot of people won't forgive him for that, because they identify with the hostages and their families, and everybody knows someone who knows someone who knows a hostage or a fallen soldier. Right. On the other hand, if he lets Hamas live, he won't be forgiven for that either. We should all say a prayer that we're not Benjamin Netanyahu and faced with that terrible choice. I think he knows what his obligation is. He's got to secure the many more than the few. But it's a very hard position to be in. We have to have sympathy for that and understand this is still an existential struggle for the life of the Jewish people and of the Jewish state. And it's his obligation to ensure that there is never again an October 7th. And that's why the war against Hamas. And let me say, separately from this issue of hostages, there's very strong support for the war effort. When people are called up from the reserves, it's like 120% people report for reserve duty. Everybody is all in. This is a country where there is patriotism in a way that, I think Americans in general didn't feel since World War II. It's very different. Everybody serves there. As depressing, I've been in Israel a number of times since October 7th and during this current war. And there's a lot of things to be depressed about. So many funerals, so much suffering, so much sacrifice. But it's also inspiring, because I have to tell you, you speak to the young people, they're all willing to fight. They all go in, and when they come out, they'll tell you, I'm ready to go right back in, because I know what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for my family and for my home. So Israel, despite the travails, the most important thing I can tell our audience here is Israel isn't giving up. Israel is fighting. Israel's people are resilient. They will fight for their families, for their homes, for their country. As previous generations have done, they are not going to be defeated. And with God's help and with the help of the United States, they will win.
Jonathan, you're fabulous. Thank you for your time. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, jns.org is the website where you could check out a lot of what's going on there. That is the go-to place. You know what's so interesting about this, Jonathan, as you well know, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was blamed for October 7th for a breakdown in intelligence, but they also don't want anybody else but him to fight the results of October 7th.
Yeah, he is. As French former French leader Charles de Gaulle said, the cemeteries are full of indispensable men. But the truth is, there is no one else in Israel right now who could have done what he's done the last year and a half, fending off Biden, fighting this war, doing what needs to be done. There's nobody on the horizon, quite frankly, who has his skill set. And the polls show a lot of people don't like him. He's been around forever, longer, frankly, than any Democratic leader should be, because, there should be turnover in a democracy. But he, all the polls show that he has a solid core of support. And the polls show that you match him up against anybody else, they say Benjamin Netanyahu should continue to be our prime minister.
All right. Good to see you, friend. Thanks for your time. Look forward to more visits. God bless you. Stay there.
Thank you.
Okay.